Okay, hello everybody and welcome to Obux Presents. My name is Ben Crabe and today I'm super happy to welcome on one of our guests who is one of our authors, who is an international Reiki master. His name is Frans Stiene, and Frans has been a major influence on global research into the system of Reiki since the early 2000s. His practical understanding of the Japanese influences on the system has allowed students around the world to connect deeply with this practice. Students naturally respond to Frans' warmth and intelligence. His own personal spiritual Reiki practice is a model that many students wish to emulate and offer great encouragement to those on the same path. Frans is co-founder of the International House of Reiki and Shibumi International Reiki Association with Bronwen Logan. He has also co-authored with her the critically acclaimed books The Reiki Sourcebook, The Japanese Art of Reiki, A to Z of Reiki Pocketbook, Reiki Techniques Card Deck, Your Reiki Treatment, Inner Heart of Reiki, Rediscovering Your True Self, and the upcoming new book, Reiki Insights. Welcome, Frans. Hello.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. I'm really excited to talk about Reiki. I know lots of people, it's growing in popularity here in England and it's becoming more in our consciousness, in our mainstream. But one of the things we do here, we want to talk about healing methods, spiritual practices, and try and make them explainable for maybe people who haven't heard about them or understand them. So the first thing I want to ask you is, what is Reiki and how did you become drawn to being involved with it?
Ooh, that is a long question. A good question. So the first thing was really that I became drawn to it about 20 years ago, 21 years ago. And I was going through a bit of a difficult time myself. I used to drink a lot and I also had a issue with my back since I was about 16. It's called the Sherman disease. And they put me in plaster from here to here, etc. And so they were saying, you know, it will only get worse when you get older. So when I was about 30, indeed, the pain in my back got worse, and therefore also the drinking got worse. So at one point, I was looking at doing something for myself because the doctors would just say, well, you just have to take painkillers and physiotherapy, and that's all we can do. So I started to investigate, and one of the things I was investigating was the system of Reiki, and so I started to apply that. The system of Reiki in itself is a really interesting practice. It originated in Japan, and a lot of modern Reiki practitioners now, even in Japan, focus solely on kind of the concept of hands-on healing, what they then say is the system of Reiki. But that's really one tiny aspect of the system of Reiki. Traditionally, it was a spiritual practice for your own self to lay bare your own inner great bright light. And in that inner great bright light, we could say within the system of Reiki, there's a certain set of precepts. And so therefore we can say that inner great bright light is softening of our anger, softening of our worry, softening of our fear, becoming more grateful, becoming more true to our way and our being, and becoming more compassionate to ourselves and others.
I see. So it's a whole spiritual path as well as the act of hands-on healing. But am I right in saying most people think of it, they first of all think of the hands-on healing, but they maybe haven't quite fully understood that there's a whole connected spiritual practice with it?
Yes, indeed. I think it's more popular as a hands-on healing practice, and that's one of the aims of the International House of Reiki and writing also the books, for example, the Inner Heart of Reiki and Reiki Insights and the Japanese Art of Reiki, is really showing people that to be able actually to perform hands-on healing on someone else, that it comes really first of all from yourself, your own personal spiritual development. Yeah. So for example, if I look at the precepts are do not anger, do not worry, be grateful, be true to your way and your being, and show compassion to yourself and others. Thus we can ask ourselves, if I place my hands on someone for healing to take place, then if I do that with anger and worry, not being grateful, not being true to my way in my being, or not being compassionate, or I do that with no anger, no worry, being grateful, being true to my way, and being compassionate, of course, that's going to make a big difference. So therefore, the first point of call ultimately is really your own personal development within the system of Reiki.
I see, and especially if you're going to be someone who practices it or does heal people, it's vital that, like you said, those precepts are going to transform the way you work and inform the way you work.
Absolutely, yeah. And for me, it's really, even I wouldn't even say for myself that I heal a person, because ultimately, if I really could heal a person, I would stand on a corner somewhere in the UK and, London, busy street, and say, okay, next healed, and within no time, London or the whole world will be a beautiful, loving and compassionate space. And kind of we all know that we cannot really do that. So therefore, it's really, I see myself more as a facilitator. And so it's really during a session, I hold that space. And the more I can go for myself into that space of that inner bright light, so that light of no anger and worry, the more light that person has to find their own inner light, so that they can start to heal themselves with that inner light, what they always had in the first place.
I see. So I'd like to quickly talk about the hands-on healing as a starting point, and then move into the broader context, the inner light and those precepts. But just for people who may be listening to it and wondering about the hands-on healing, or that might be the context they know it, I had an experience. It wasn't with someone who advertised themselves as a Reiki practitioner, but it was hands-on healing. And I lay down, and the practitioner told me that she said, I don't do anything, I channel energy. She said use the word consciousness, but in a way, her own inner light, or I'm trying to use the terms that you've been using, and she passed her hands over me for maybe half an hour or 40 minutes, and I remember feeling a warm, energetic, relaxing sensation around the areas where she passed her hands, and afterwards I felt very calm, a kind of clarity and peace, and sort of does this describe the act of the healing? Could you go into a bit of detail about what happens in that situation in terms of Reiki?
Yeah, I mean, I see it ultimately. The word Reiki traditionally is translated as spiritual energy, and it's really, we are that spiritual energy. Everybody is that spiritual energy. It is said that the founder of the system of Reiki, Mikosui, said that everything in the universe is Reiki, or in other words, that the universe is me and I'm the universe. And therefore, the more we realize that we are that universe, then hands-on healing becomes something quite different. But so I think we all have that birthright for hands-on healing. You have a son, and if your son falls over, you touch his knee, and if, oh, thanks, Dad, that feels better. Because as soon as you put your hands on your son's knee, his own mind goes to the knee because he can feel your hand there. And so therefore his own internal energy also goes to the knee. So that's one really beautiful thing about touch. I think also touch is really interesting, because if I put my hands on myself, then something interesting happens, what not many people think about, but it's that I am, at the same time, I'm the toucher, but I'm also the one being touched. Yeah. So it's actually a really interesting thing that in this moment I become the toucher. Frans is touching Frans, but Frans is also being touched at the same time. So the whole concept of hands-on healing on yourself is also about softening that grasp on the I or the ego. So, for example, often we say to ourselves, I cannot heal myself, I don't have that energy, I'm not good enough. I need to, only the doctor can do this, or only the Reiki teacher can do this, or only the healer can do this. But by placing our hands on ourselves, we soften that grip of the I. And therefore also we soften that grip of, I cannot do this, I'm not good enough. And therefore that inner energy, what is kind of always there because we are that universe, starts to be blossoming, and we go, oh, here is it. And suddenly we might feel heat or tingling or pulsation, or maybe nothing in our hands, but maybe we feel it more in our mind, that our mind becomes calmer or our body becomes more relaxed. And I think also, when we touch, you might do that to your partner or to your kid, or when we do it to an animal, when we touch, that feels so good. It often we relax, we calm. And I think also particularly in our society where now we have become very touch-starved, touch I think is a wonderful method for healing, not just solely unique to the system of Reiki. I think it's really, we all have hands, and therefore it's our birthright. However, Ben, I also think that the real touching is not just with my hands, but is really with my heart or my mind. So when I touch with love and compassion and kindness, then the way I touch is very differently. So even that we put our hands on someone, we might say we do hands-on healing with our hands, the underlying essence is really that healing takes place with our mind and our heart, that heart of love and compassion. So when I put my hands on myself, in reality, I'm saying, oh, I'm loving you, Frans. It's okay. You have that pain. You have that discomfort. But it's okay. Just allow it to be there.
So what you've described is a beautiful self-loving practice you can do with yourself. And I was thinking, as you said that about touch, about your state of mind, that I was thinking, like when you hug your child or you stroke your pet or you hug someone you love, you're experiencing some of what we're talking about with Reiki. But then if you've just had an argument with someone and then you try to hug them, or you're in a distracted or ungrounded state of mind, then the experience of the hug is different. It doesn't necessarily make you feel better. It could make you feel worse in a way.
Absolutely. This is why it is so essential that if we become a practitioner, even if it's just to put our hands on someone, a friend or a family member, or if as a practitioner we might set up a clinic, but that ultimately that our mind becomes calm, and that the mind softens, is more open, more encompassing, and ultimately that the mind therefore realizes in its fullest, I am the universe and the universe is me. So there's lots of specific practices, meditation practices within the system of Reiki to support that peeling away of those layers of that light, what often we put over ourselves. We have that inner beautiful bright light, but then we put worry and anger and fear, and also I think attachments to healing. So for example, I might have a pain in my knee and I put my hands on my knee, but if my mind says it needs to be healed, it needs to be healed, it needs to be healed, then I'm holding that healing very tight. Or if I do a treatment on a client and I say, oh, it needs to be healed, and I hold it so tight, but if I hold my mind very tight, then that energy cannot flow. There is no space ultimately for that healing to take place. So therefore, the whole system of Reiki is really opening that grasping and letting go of any expectations, of distinguishing, of labeling. And I think we see that too, Ben, you said about a hug. If we give a hug with a lot of expectations, or distinguishing, or as you said, worry or anger, then that hug becomes a little bit not so pleasant, right?
Yeah.
And this is the same with hands-on healing.
And do you think that's good advice for anyone who's experiencing pain or some chronic pain or emotional wound, whether they come and see a Reiki practitioner or not, to facilitate their healing, it's about letting go of the need to change it now. And
yes, indeed.
Sorry, go
yes,
on.
indeed, Ben. I think that the grasping of the wanting to get rid of the headache, when I want to get rid of something, I kind of push against this, right? So a certain fight is taking place. But if I say, oh, okay, I create that space for that pain or discomfort or this illness to be there, it's okay. I accept it. And not that I'm going, oh, I'm accepting it, I can't do anything, but actually accepting it in a loving, kind way, then we create a tremendous amount of freedom in our mind. We're not fighting anymore. And therefore that energy starts to become so much more freer, and therefore healing can take place on a much different level. And also, I think then if the headache doesn't go away due to whatever kind of reasons, then we're not going to say to ourselves, oh, I can't do it, I'm not good enough. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So if I say to myself, I'm going to do my healing and I've got a cold and it has to go, then if it's not yet time to go, then after 20 minutes hands-on healing, I might say to myself, you see, I can't do it, I'm not good enough. Yeah. But if we just say, just see whatever takes place. If it stays, it stays. If it goes, it goes. It doesn't matter.
I think that's a very good point. I see it a lot in spiritual circles, the idea that it's my fault, everything bad is my fault in a way. And if I don't feel wonderful, then I'm doing something wrong, and that's quite poisonous, really, isn't it? That idea.
Oh, I agree, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, in your practice, how do you divide your time? Do you work with people one-on-one with healing, and how much do you train practitioners? How do you divide your time in your work at the moment?
Oh, that's a good idea. I do a lot. I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's my lifestyle. I won't even call it my work or job. It's my lifestyle. And so I do lots of one-on-one sessions, either with hands-on healing, or sometimes we just sit in meditation space together, or sometimes within the system of Reiki, traditionally there was also some chanting, so then I might do some chanting. I teach classes. I do that in actually all over the world, in Europe, in Australia, and Asia, in the US, Canada. Then I also do a lot of Skype sessions with people, and I do something what is called, between brackets, distance healing. It's actually realizing that there's no distance at all. So I kind of divide most of it a little bit equally. I like them all, actually, and I get a lot out of one-on-one sessions. I get a lot out of teaching, and I think it's something wonderful, for sharing. And I think if we realize that we all have the potential of that light and that kindness and caring and compassion and less anger, then if I can share that during my daily life with my partner or the dog or a child or my neighbor or the person in a cafe, then ultimately healing already starts to take place on a much broader scheme than just doing hands-on healing. So in my classes, I emphasize, yes, we do hands-on healing, but I emphasize also that healing is not just the hands, is the way I act in the world.
That's very inspiring, and I can feel that you walk the walk here. I think, and what you're saying is, if someone is listening to this and they're interested in Reiki, so it's, it's something they can use a practitioner to facilitate healing in their life. But what you're also saying is, if you want to learn Reiki, or you're interested in knowing more about Reiki, you don't necessarily have to then become a registered Reiki healer. There's a broader spiritual path, and by following it in and living these precepts and living the principles, in a way you facilitate healing just by being in the world with your actions, like you said, with a dog or your family. Or is that right?
Yeah, that's indeed. Like I have students who I'm working with for the last 15 years who hardly do hands-on healing on someone else. But through their personal practice, they feel they can live in this world in a much more kinder way, and they also feel that maybe their anger has softened, their worry has softened. They might feel that it's much easier to express themselves to who they are as maybe being gay or lesbian, or dressing differently, like really saying, oh, this is me, and it's okay to be me, because we put these people so much into boxes, nowadays. And for me, ultimately, the system of Reiki is about getting rid of the boxes. We are just a beautiful bright light, and the more we realize that, then healing is living, and living is healing.
Lovely. Living is healing, and healing is living. And it's okay to be me. That's a big one. That is, people take a long time.
Well, that's it. Yeah, I'm wearing this kind of tops, and I quite like them. The other day, my daughter walks in and goes, "Oh, Dad, you're wearing a tea towel," and I go, "Yes, I like it," But if I wasn't really grounded and centered, and maybe hadn't done my own personal practice, then I might go, oh, maybe it does look like a tea towel. Maybe other people don't like it, so maybe I don't wear it, even that I do like it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And in your work, I'm aware that you've learned as part of a lineage from teachers who've been, I guess, passed down this knowledge from generation to generation to generation. So firstly, I'd like to ask you a little bit about lineage, where you've learned from, how you've learned, who you've learned from, where it comes from, and then maybe about some specific practices after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in an unfortunate way, I think within the system of Reiki, a lot of people talk about lineage. And for me, lineage, I mean, if we think from a very traditional perspective, I think is wonderful, because if in the past you would become an apprentice with the teacher, and the teacher would then say, maybe after 10 years time, okay, Ben, now you're okay to do hands-on healing or become a teacher. And so that became kind of really unchanged, because that relationship with the teacher and student was so long. Nowadays, we kind of buy a yoga teacher or a Reiki teacher, and that goes all pretty quick. So I think lineage is, in modern ways, is not always as juicy, if that makes sense, as in the olden days. So I think for me, if I really look deep inside myself, then the most important lineage is the lineage to your own great bright light, to your own heart, to your own pure mind of no anger, no worry, no fear, being grateful and being true to your way and your being, and being compassionate. And I think we say, even if we have trained with Mikosui, but if we don't practice and we're still assholes, then then that lineage doesn't really mean anything. So the lineage is really, for me, that proof in the pudding, where we can really say, oh yes, I feel really part of this lineage of being kind and compassionate and open and willing to share and willing to help people, no matter who they are, no matter what they are, no matter what. So that is my concept of lineage, in a way.
I love the way you talk about that. And I think so. It's not just necessarily about wearing a badge saying I've done this and I've done 10 years practice with this important person, so I'm important. It's like the proof is in the pudding. Is how is it expressing in your own life, and how much are you embodying what the teaching is all about?
That's absolutely right. For me, it's really about embodying. About 20 years ago, I lived in India for 2 years, and for 1 year in the Himalaya, and we lived in a Tibetan community area. And what was really interesting, there was a lot of Western modern Tibetan Buddhist practitioners, and we would go to the same kind of cafes, and it was all a bit new for me. And often they were arguing, my lineage is better than yours, my Buddha is better than yours, I wear more malas around my wrist than you. And I was sitting there and I got really confused because it was all a bit new for me. Yeah. So I spoke to a Rinpoche, and I said, oh, Rinpoche, can I ask you something? And I said, this is happening when I observe in this particular cafe. They're all kind of arguing with each other. And so he looks me in the eyes, and I still remember it very vividly. And he looks me in the eye and said, Frans, how do you spot a real Buddhist? And I go, I have no idea. He said, you grab a plank, hit them on the head, and see what their reaction is. And that kind of teaching has always stayed with me. And I think this is the same with the system of Reiki. This is the same with the Christianity. This is the same with yoga or Hindu or Muslim or whatever kind of practice, Taoism, Tai Chi, Qigong we do, is that proof is in the pudding of that kindness and loving, because that's really where that sharing comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm getting from listening to you now is, I think, a great talent is that you're opening it up for everyone. Really, you're making it the global world today, making the language clear and accessible. But you're also being faithful to the precision of the philosophy and the practices that you've been taught. But you're not saying you have to come into my special club. You're making it open to all people.
Yeah, I think this is within the system of Reiki, you have almost like the yin and yang, so heaven and earth. And one of the things I often see it as being firm and flexible. So we have to be very flexible to make old teachings more accessible. And at the same time, we have to be a bit firm to still keep practicing those old methods in the right way. And so it's that constant balance between firm and flexible. But I think this is also in our relationship or at work, where the more we feel that balance between firm and flexible, life becomes a bit easier. Because if I'm always firm, it's really difficult to be flexible. If I'm always flexible, it's really difficult to be firm. But if I can be both at the same time, then life becomes also a bit easier.
I love that. I love firm and flexible, firm enough to keep to the tradition and hold on to the bit, flexible enough to adapt. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's applicable to everything, really.
Well, absolutely, yes, yeah.
And so you mentioned the precepts, which were to do with anger, compassion, and what were the other precepts?
So it's do not anger, do not worry, be grateful. Be true to your way and your being, and show compassion to yourself and others.
Be true to your way and your being, show compassion to yourself and others. So if I was coming to you and saying, I'm feeling angry, I don't like my own being, and I'm not very feeling compassionate, but I'm interested in Reiki, I'm interested in developing these precepts and compassions, what are the sort of practices, practical ways you go about it and you teach and that you do?
I think the founder of the system of Reiki, Mikasui, I think he was really clever. And so what is really interesting, if we look at his teachings, we see visual aids. So, for example, symbols. We see auditory aids like a mantra. We see kinesthetic aids like meditation or hands-on healing. We see also intellectual aids of contemplating, for example, the precepts. And I think if we would teach one-on-one, then as a teacher, we have to look at, is that person more auditory, visual, kinesthetic, or intellectual, and then we can tailor make almost the teachings to that person, particularly if we teach one-on-one. So I always see for myself, if this room where I'm sitting in, if this is a state of being of kindness and compassion, and maybe the softening of anger and worry, then I've got here 1, 2, 3 doors and a couple of windows. Then it doesn't matter if I come in through the door of chanting, or I come in through the door of a visual on a symbol, or I come in through the door of a kinesthetic practice or a breathing practice, or I come into the door of maybe intellectualizing. As soon as I'm in this room, then it doesn't matter how I got there. And I think this is a good teacher needs to come to the student's level, because if you're very auditory and I'm going to teach you something to intellectualize about, you go, this is not working for me. Sorry, Frans. But if we discover together that you are very auditory, and then I might say, oh, here is a really great mantra, practice it, then of course that will have a much deeper effect on you than if I teach you something what is not true to your way and your being.
That's brilliant. For instance, for me, intellectual is part of it. I wouldn't be here now talking to you if it wasn't, or
Yes.
working into OBOOKS. And so a good piece of advice to someone who's maybe there's so much spirituality out there now, is to think about, what am I drawn to? Am I drawn to the singing and the chanting, the active practice, or am I drawn to the books, or am I drawn to sitting in a room and meditating, and to sort of look inside, and rather than saying, oh, my friend, she does mantras all the time, I should be doing that.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also this is why I really like the precepts within the system of Reiki, be true to your way and your being. So the teacher is really there to facilitate your way and your being, not the teacher's way, because if I, as you say, if I like chanting and you don't like it, and I say, no, you have to do it, then it's not going to work. You're going to give up, and that's a waste of our time. But if I can help you to rediscover your way and your being, whatever that might be, then, and you feel that through that you become less angry, less worried. And, I think also this is why there is no, sometimes people say, oh, but Reiki is better than yoga, yoga is better than Tai Chi, we have all these things. One is not better than the other because they all tap into that same kind of thing. But some people need more movement-based practices, while other people are okay with just sitting very still. I work with a teacher in Japan. He's a very high priest in Japan, and he always says sitting still for him is not working. That, he said, is not my thing. He said, so therefore for him, he does very much like mountain practices. They go into the mountains, stand under the waterfall, hang off cliffs, and do all these really more physicality practices. And he's really honest and open in that. And I think this is so wonderful. And he's really teaching me to be more open in that way, because I can really see that is really where the true healing comes from.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And what is perhaps working for you isn't necessarily the right thing for someone else. Or I think that's something that, what you're saying is something that we forget sometimes in mind, body, spirit world, because people, lots of people out there, lots of people have lots of beautiful knowledge that they want to share, but sometimes the idea of finding, what fits with your authentic expression of who you are is lost in there, because everyone's trying to say, do my thing. But,
Yes, I agree. And, I see for myself, and I think maybe because I've been lucky Reiki. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I had a very good role model also. I worked for about 12 years with a Taoist teacher. Yeah. And what was really interesting, because she worked really in that way. She was brought up in a Taoist community in China, never advertised. She was just absolutely brilliant. And unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago. But the way she worked with me, she said, Frans, your way is Reiki. I'm going to help you to support and find your way. And has nothing to do with me being a Taoist teacher. I'm going to show you how you can delve more into that Reiki world from my perspective, but it's still your juice. And my teachers in Japan, they do exactly the same thing. And they come from those very old teachings, where they've been doing this since they were very young. And so I think it's hard sometimes when we first start, because then we say, no, it has to be like this. But I think if we say it has to be like this, we stick the teachings in a very small box. And if we stick teachings in a very small box, then there's not much energy, really. It's not much energy to heal, because we're limiting ourselves by saying, no, it has to be like this. And so therefore, actually, we teach a lot of people who do Qigong or are Qigong teachers, Reiki teachers, yoga teachers, Buddhist teachers, meditation teachers, and not saying, oh, you have to use Reiki within that, but helping to open their mind more and more to that more universal. I mean, the universe is not boxed in, right? There is no beginning and end. So if we really think that a spiritual practice is a universal spiritual practice, then we need to operate from that same viewpoint.
It's very, very inspiring. I could talk about this for longer. I want to talk about some of the specific practices. I want to mention one just because I've read about this through other in terms of Eastern sort of specifically Japanese or Chinese philosophy, but it's part of Reiki I saw in your book, which is I want to talk about a couple of the practices that help us get in touch with our shining self. And one of the ones that has made a difference to me and is the idea of grounding and your center, and I think it's called the hara. Am I right?
Yeah, the hara, or sometimes called tanden, or and I travel with this, and it's maybe you remember it. It's a weeble wobble.
Oh yeah.
Yes, and I always travel with it when I teach, because weebles wobble, but they don't fall, right? And so when I show this in class, I say, okay, why doesn't the weeble fall over? And they all say, oh, because the weight is at the bottom. So even for example, if the weeble wobble life is turned upside down, the weeble wobble comes back up again. And this is because the weeble wobble is really grounded. And another wonderful aspect about the weeble wobble is that the weeble weebles, right? So the weeble can still feel emotions, can be upset and feels trauma, feels pain, but automatically the weeble wobble is coming back to its center again. Because normally what happens, someone says something to us and we lay down for an hour, stay angry, or sometimes a month, and sometimes the rest of our life. Yeah. But if we become more that centered, like the weeble wobble, then someone says something, yes, we still feel maybe a bit anger and a bit worry, but the next moment, oh, here is that calm center again. And I think for me that is so important, particularly in our modern life, because we are so in our heads. with computers, with phones, with these kind of things, with movies, all of this. We're very intellectual, so we create a lot of energy here, and very rarely now we work on the land. We really feel those roots. And if we think about spiritual practices, maybe 5,000 years ago, where a lot of the focus was maybe breathing in and we can feel that air coming in here. What was wonderful at that time, but those people were actually so grounded and centered because they weren't living in big cities. They were nature. Their interconnectedness with that nature was so strong. They could go straight to these kind of more meditation practices. Yeah. But for us, where we live in concrete jungles, we work 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. We're constantly on Facebook, Twitter, you name it, all in this headspace. Therefore, I think for our current society is of utmost importance that we work with that groundedness and centeredness. And therefore, Weeble Wobble is a perfect example.
Yeah. And I love the Weeble Wobble because the Weeble Wobble is a bit like what you said before, like being flexible and firm. It's firm and it always comes back to its center, but it's flexible and it wibble wobbles everywhere. But for me,
yes,
I'm a classic example. I remember, I love communication. I'm a mental guy in lots of ways, but I grew up very much up here, and just that's all I knew, and that's all that's the only place I was in my head. And for me, my grounding practice is about feeling the ground and maybe going out into earth, but also that position which I think you talk about in your book, which is just below your navel. And is that something you teach in a physical sense about being grounded in bringing your attention to just below your navel? That's your center of gravity.
That's it. If I would stand up, you would see that just below my navel is exactly the middle of my body. And so that's my center of gravity. So we can do that through breathing in and following the breath and the mind and the energy all the way down to that place. Some people find it a little bit difficult to just do that with their mind because their mind is so busy. And if they feel that very difficult with the mind, then we can even use our hands and we can go like, just like a percolator, and we go down, and then we might even touch gently that spot just below our navel, because the moment I touch there, I can feel it. Therefore, my mind goes there, and therefore my energy goes there. So we can do these kind of movements 10, 15 times very slowly. The more slower we do, the more the mind can travel with that movement, and therefore the more energy can also go down to that place. And therefore slowly over time, we become a little bit more centered and grounded. And, if you really think about it, if we get angry, our face becomes really red, right? It's so that energy is really here. If we're worried, it's really around here. So therefore, if I put my focus more down, that softens that anger, that softens that worry around the head center.
I see, yeah, and that's great. Probably many times a day, if you have a busy family or a busy workplace, it's very easy. It's a bit crazy. so that bringing that energy.
Oh, absolutely.
Bringing that energy there is what I've personally found been a big help in navigating it and not going off at the deep end and doing something silly or letting the anger spiral out of control.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And so we talked about precepts. We talked a bit about keeping centered. Are there any other aspects of the content of what you teach and the practices that are your favorite, or you particularly you like to focus on, that you'd like to share now?
My own, if I talk about being true to my way and my being, is really, I love the chanting aspect of within the system of Reiki, and we can do that with the precepts in Japanese. There's certain very specific mantras. In a lot of modern practices, those are very externalized.
Yeah.
But if we focus the symbols and mantras very externally, then it becomes much harder to find what lays hidden within ourselves. So that true self, that inner bright light. So traditionally, those mantras were internalized. Those symbols were internalized, and I really like that chanting of the mantras. Also, because when we chanted, is a little bit tactile. We can kind of almost, if I put my hand in front of my mouth and I say something a little bit more loud, I can feel a certain vibration. And sometimes when we practice, feeling something will help us to say, oh, something is happening. Sometimes if we just sit very still and we don't feel anything, then we might go, why am I doing this? I'm not feeling anything, because, we're so disconnected often from our body that we look for we need to feel something, we need to sweat, or we need to feel pain or discomfort, but sometimes it's just so subtle. Therefore, the chanting can be quite wonderful. And this is based on the ancient principle of kototama in Japanese spiritual practices.
Kototama. And do you chant in Japanese, or what are you chanting?
Yes, it's in Japanese, and it's actually really simple. And you can make it, of course, as difficult as you want. We don't even have to speak Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. I say Kyoto and sushi, that's about it. But, and luckily my teachers in Japan, they speak English, so we get by. But, the chanting is very much, you work very specific sounds, and these sounds will vibrate through your body. And I always see it a bit like this. We bring a car to the garage once or twice or 3 times a year because everything becomes a little bit loose in the car due to the vibration on the road. So when we do the chanting, so for example, oh, and we do it very consciously, so not like, oh, we think about a million other things, but if we do it very consciously, then we can start to feel that vibration through our body, what loosens up all these things we hold on very tight. So therefore, we become more open-minded, what means we become less angry, less worried, less fearful, etc.
Wonderful. And when you teach, how do you? So you offer the healing aspect of Reiki, but when you teach all the rest of it, the life path and the way of living, how do you prefer to work with people? Do you offer a course where you get accredited at the end, or do you work privately, one-to-one, or both? Or how if someone wanted to work with you, how would they do it?
Both, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes in groups. But I also see it that, so for example, within the system of Reiki, traditionally there were 3 levels. The first level is called Shoden. And Shoden means like beginner's teachings. Okuden means hidden or inner teachings, what is really about finding what is hidden inside of you, rediscovering that. And Shimpuden means mystery teachings. And for me, Shimpuden, if we practice that mystery teachings, is the rest of our life. So it's not, okay, now we have done the class and that's it. It's really the rest of our life. And this is why I've got students who I see once or twice or 3 times a year, maybe for the last 15 years. And we communicate during that year, maybe by email or Skype. And I see it that we hold each other's hands and grow together into that space, to laying bare that space of love and compassion and kindness, and together softening that anger and worry. And so, as we all know, there is no magic pill to that. If there was a magic pill, then the world would be already a beautiful I mean, it is beautiful, but it will be, you know, like a place with much more love and compassion and kindness and joy and those kind of things. So it takes a lot of dedication, a lot of practice. And so even if I teach a class, say maybe of 30 people, they go home, they practice, and then individually we start to work together. And then they come again maybe in a group, and then the group works as a whole together. And that is kind of how we grow together.
I see. So, and what you're saying is, you know, I can come to you and you can teach me, I can read your book and it's beautiful, and I can learn the structure and the concepts. But what we're really talking about is a lifelong journey and constant learning, constant development and practice, really.
Yes, and I think this is the beauty, you know, like if I look at the precepts, the cornerstone of the system of Reiki, or the foundation of the system of Reiki, it's all about the mind. So the mind of no anger, the mind of not worry, the mind of being grateful, the mind of being true to your way and your being, and a mind of compassion. So it doesn't really say something about hands-on healing. For me, that hands-on healing, almost we could say it's a byproduct of embodying those precepts more and more, that I can really touch someone with love and compassion and kindness. And then if I can really touch that person with love and kindness and compassion, then automatically that radiates more out of me, and therefore I can touch them not just with my hands, but with my whole being. If I sit in a cafe, in a restaurant, or walk in the street, or talk to my partner or daughter, or doesn't matter, sit with an animal.
Yeah, I love that, and that's well, I love what you're saying. To me makes a lot of sense, but it's applicable for all spiritual paths as well. I think I was thinking, like, the more the more you deeply integrate this stuff into yourself, the more you're able to, I don't always like this word, energetically give to other people.
Yes, I see it a bit like this. Let me see if I have that here. Hang on, if I can reach it. This is one of those lovely little bowls, right? And so if we think that the universe is always there, I mean, we're always touching 24 hours a day the universe. So ultimately, we're touching this healing space 24 hours a day. And within the system of Reiki, traditionally, the metaphor was rain, universal rain, not just a watery rain, but universal rain. So if this universal rain falls in this bowl, and then it always starts to overflow. So even if I give you something to drink from this bowl, as soon as I put it back, that rain keeps it full, keeps it overflowing. But if I feel disconnected from this rain, so with anger and worry, I stick an umbrella up, and now I give you something, but because of the umbrella of anger and worry and fear, attachments, distinguishing, labeling, my bowl is not getting filled. So at one moment I feel like, gosh, I've emptied myself out. But if I, through the practice, I realize that let go of that umbrella and I'm touching that universal rain 24 hours a day, then healing is always available.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. And I feel very inspired and infused by talking to you. And I feel that you don't just know about it, but you do deeply integrate it and live it and understand it. If people want to find you, because I know you're in Australia, but you don't have to go to Australia, necessarily be in Australia to work with you. If people want to have a hands-on healing with you, or a remote healing, or to study with you, or to know more about this, we've got your books, of course, but also how can we get in touch? Where can we find you? And what are you up to at the moment?
So our website is www.ihreiki.com. And I'm also on Facebook under International House of Reiki and Frans Stiene. So Facebook, the web, I'm also on LinkedIn. So I'll be teaching the next couple of weeks in Australia, and then I will be teaching in September in the US, in Washington, D.C., in California, and just outside of Detroit. And then in November, I'll be teaching in Paris, about an hour and a half from London, and in Holland. And I teach a lot everywhere, and I love doing that. I think it's such a wonderful thing I really see it as creating this wonderful family of practitioners where we all, as I said, hold hands and hopefully can make the world a bit of a better place.
Brilliant, beautiful. And so your most recent book with us was The Inner Heart of Reiki, Rediscovering Your Truth Self, which was, I guess, very much about the spiritual path of Reiki as well. And you've got upcoming book, Reiki Insights. Can you tell us a little bit about that and when it's out and what's that about?
So Reiki Insights will hopefully be out at the end of this year. And Reiki Insights is kind of a continuation of the Inner Heart of Reiki. And the way I put it together is really in short, small chapters. And for me, is really that we can read the one chapter and think about it, meditate upon it, feel it, sense it, so that we hopefully get that direct experience.
So it's like a contemplative book, like contemplative.
Yeah, it touches upon lots of different aspects of the system of Reiki. And I always see it like this. The first thing what we often do, we read a book or we might listen to a teaching, but that's not enough to have that feel, right? So then, in fact, we need to go home and contemplate these teachings, if what we read or what we heard, if that's true, right?
Yeah.
But that is also not enough. Then the third thing is that we have to have the direct experience. And so if we do the intellectual contemplation and then the direct experience and we mix them all together, then I think we get a really good sense of what the system of Reiki is about. And so that book is really about, you read it, go home, contemplate it, then meditate upon it, and then really feel that direct experience and say, yes, that makes completely sense.
Yeah, so it's like, I think the Buddha said, don't take it from me, test it out in yourself. He said something like gold.
Absolutely.
Bite it, scratch it, test it out for yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Fantastic. It's such a pleasure talking to you, Frans. I wish you the very best in future teaching and practice of Reiki. It's super inspiring, and I think you're doing wonderful work. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben, for inviting me. And speak to you soon.
Brilliant.